How do you incorporate learner preferences into this process?
Why do I need this microlearning experience?
Do you think microlearning is effective?
So understanding the basics of cognitive load theory would be key.
Developing any type of microlearning experiences. Hey everybody, Erick Prospero here with the Microlearning Lab. Today I'm here with Nidhi Sachdeva, and today we're going to be discussing 5 tips for microlearning. And essentially these are going to be evidence-based tips. We're not necessarily talking about just general best practices. Today I'm here with a true expert in the field. Nidhi, can you tell me a little more about yourself?
Yes, absolutely. So as Erick said, my name is Nidhi. I'm based in Toronto. And I've written a doctoral thesis on the topic of microlearning, so it's great to be here to be able to share that. I teach in the teacher education program, and I also work a little bit in the industry and do some consulting with regards to where there is a need for microlearning. And my goal is always to bring in the evidence when we're designing any kind of learning, but also for microlearning.
Perfect. And again, if you follow her on LinkedIn, we'll include her LinkedIn profile in the YouTube channel description. You're going to see that she has worked with some of the larger organizations specifically on microlearning. So she is one of the experts in this space. So with that being said, let's jump into the 5 tips and let's hear it for tip number 1.
Okay, so tip number 1, I would say is if you are thinking of designing a microlearning experience, then you want to start with the idea called instructional purpose. This is an essential starting point. Think about it as the why of your micro lesson or micro course or any learning experience, actually, for that matter, that you're developing. And this is the reason for doing something. So I'd say learning designers, trainers, coaches, instructional designers, they should ask themselves, why do I need this microlearning experience for my employees or for my learners or whoever you're creating that microlearning experience for? And what do you wish to achieve from it? Instructional purpose is the reason for someone to develop a microlearning experience on the chosen content. It can be understood in terms of providing a summary of something. Perhaps the purpose is augmentation or enrichment. So you did something and you want take their learning to the next level or one step further. And it could also be, the purpose could also be clarification of tricky concepts, or again, it could simply be a review. But if you think about the instructional purpose before venturing out to spending hours and hours of work, then you'd be creating that track for yourself that leads to the most effective and most efficient sort of learning experience for whoever you're creating the microlearning experience for.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know we typically like to focus on the specific business metrics that are being impacted or even a certain behavior, but this is more of an all-encompassing approach. And not only that, I guess there are certain companies where those two aren't necessarily a key factor. So if it's more academic as well, right?
Yeah, and I have to say that whatever I'm sharing today in terms of the tips, these kind of almost emerged in multiple studies, but definitely my doctoral work when I was working with my students, where microlearning in academia is a bit of a newer idea. But then when you look at what emerged, this is evidence-informed, you start exploring it and say, hey, this is not just for academia, this actually applies so much further. The mileage of these instructional or these microlearning principles, if I may call them, or these tips to create effective microlearning, it's just so much sort of far beyond that just one specific example that I'm sharing. Yeah, so thinking about the purpose definitely gives you a great starting point to do something.
Perfect. All right, what's best practice or tip number 2?
Tip number 2, or best practice, or as I like to call it, a good principle to design, is think about the content. Now, first I said for instructional purpose, I said this is the why, and I think starting with why is essential, but then you got to think about what is the what of your microlearning experience. This is the actual topic. Learning designers should ask themselves, what is it that I want to teach my folks that they're developing this micro lesson for? It could be learners, students, employees, trainees, whoever they might be. And this content should be relevant and useful. Like, these things sound almost obvious, but this is important. Sometimes we just create microlearning experiences because it'd be cool, but it may not be needed. So you got to really think about, well, what is the content and does it really work with what I'm thinking of doing? So as I said, content should be relevant, it should be useful, and ideally it should be part of something that will connect to what the folks that you're creating the micro lesson for already know. So their existing knowledge, we like to call it prior knowledge in cognitive science or background knowledge. Content is the key starting point, or an essential point, I should say, in planning to integrate a micro-learning experience in the bigger sort of learning journey, right? So it's essential that we think about the content, we think about the relevance, we think about, is it worth it? And then going ahead with that.
Perfect. And you brought up an interesting point, and I just wanted to ask about this. Do you think microlearning is effective when they don't necessarily have that existing knowledge base or that pre-priming, or do you think it's something that can operate on its own?
So going back to my first point, the purpose, right? You may notice that folks don't know something that could be a micro lesson. You may notice that folks know something, but it's faulty or insufficient prior knowledge, or it's inaccurate. Then you go back to that thing, and that micro lesson could be an asynchronous experience that you could say, hey, do this before we do that. So again, so all these principles, all these sort of tips that we're sharing, they're like so interconnected, right? So is it a standalone, or is it going to be, so that comes on later as well as I talk about some other tips, but it's kind of like going back to the purpose, like why are you doing it for? Is it a review? Is it augmentation? Is it, I know that they don't know this and they won't be able to do so and so if I don't do that. So, those are places where you can really optimize the short and sweet nature, as they call it, of microlearning. But again, with caution, because I will talk about that piece as well, because the time frame becomes a huge component when we talk about microlearning.
Perfect, which is a great segue into the next principle too, and it's probably one of the most asked questions when developing microlearning. So what's principle number 3? So
people would think I would say time, like how long it should be, but I'm not actually. And I'm one of the probably few people who wouldn't say that. Now, I'm not saying create a micro-learning experience that's going to take like a university lecture, like 3 hours or even 1 hour, for example. It's not so much about the time. I like to call it appropriate length and structure. Think about the appropriate length and structure of your micro-learning experience. So remember, I started with the why of the micro lesson, then I said the what of the micro lesson. Now I'm getting into the how of the effective micro-learning design. So why it is important to keep a micro lesson short, sticking to a specific time frame is a good idea, but that particular aspect can be a very limiting experience for some instructional designer, and that's where we make mistakes. We try to cram too much into a little bit about a time and we don't hit the mark, right? So that limiting it to a specific time frame can be pretty challenging in being able to present all that, the relevant content that I just talked about in my previous principle, right? So what I like to say is, instead of thinking in terms of time, like how long your micro lesson or micro learning experience should be, think in terms of mental complexity. So view this principle of length and structure through the lens of what we call cognitive load theory, John Sweller's cognitive load theory, and the design of the micro lesson, and design it based on those effective principles of instruction that we have been given to us by Barack Rosenshine. So if folks want to look into all these things, if you just Googled it, you'll find it. But if you follow me and the kind of work that I write about, you'll be able to see all of this. So what I wanted to say is that designers should be aware of this inherent complexity of the content. So if you're a subject matter expert of the content and you're working with an instructional designer, or if you're both of those, because that can happen depending on the size of the organization, that what you need to really, really know is what is that complexity of the content. We also call it this notion of element interactivity, which means how complex and interconnected the components are that you're going to be teaching or explaining, or you want folks to understand, right? And you need to think about the way I'm doing it, how much I'm sharing, the complexity. How might it cognitively overload the folks who would be consuming this information, who would be learning this information? And we should also keep in mind what your learner already knows. As I said, prior knowledge, background knowledge, because that will kind of like define how long and how short it could be. Because if you know that your folks know it already, you don't need to spend extra time. But if you know that this is going to not land because they just don't know the prior knowledge, then maybe you're looking at more than one micro lesson, right? So that structure, length and structure will come in play. I also like to say that the structure of micro lessons should be clear and concise if possible, without any irrelevant or unnecessary features. So things like extra visuals or distracting animations. If they're not supporting the direct learning, then there's no need for that. And the other piece I'd like to say is that sometimes you may see that you may need something that we call advanced organizer. This is kind of like an overview of the lesson prior to the new material. So people know what's about to happen, right? So they can be prepared. Their mental sort of framework is starting to get activated with all the prior knowledge they're just about to, they're going to need to be able to make sense of this new knowledge that's coming in, right? So this all should be based on the needs added to a micro-learning experience. So I would say the length and structure is far more important than sticking to a time frame. And I like to also mention to people that, let's say I said 5 minutes is a good time, 5 to 8 minutes. That is a really decent time to think about. But if you stick to that too much and don't think about the other aspects of the mental complexity, then I can create a micro lesson, but I can still cognitively overload you within that 5 minutes. So I didn't land my objective, right? And learning was not achieved the way I had imagined. So think about length and structure, not in terms of time frame, but think about cognitive load and the mental complexity of the content that you're about to share. Sorry, that was probably really long, but I think it's important stuff. That's probably the juiciest part of designing a micro-learning experience.
And that makes perfect sense. The interesting thing about developing any type of micro-learning experience is usually people want to know, or stakeholders want to know, the answer to that question before you jump into the development process, right? How long are these going to be? And I tend to think it's more of there always has to be a balance, because typically instructional designers, they're going to take a more formal approach to evaluate the content, to assess, to really determine the length. But from a product manager perspective, and I think the e-learning industry in general is missing this, that a lot of times decisions have to be made based off of user experience, right? So usually if we're planning for a series of micro-learning videos or developing content, we always give an average, right? We want to set an average length, but with that being said, it is going to depend on making sure we cover the content and respect the actual learning objective or the outcome we're going for.
And I can see what you were saying about that average piece, and I think that's very true, and it is a useful tool to have. So, let's say when we're thinking about, and micro-learning is not just videos, right? So, but if you're thinking about, let's say, videos, then I think it's kind of nice, to keep your scripts to about like 400-ish words, so we know that you're not going over the 3-minute mark, because then it kind of like loses its sort of appeal and people just drop out of it, right? So, but then micro-learning has so many different shapes, sizes, and forms, right? And that's why everybody could go through their own pace. That's an interesting part of micro-learning that we don't always think about. And then when you think about that, then you'd say, okay, it might take you 5 minutes, but you're really into it. It might take you 10 because you're just like really digging into it and thinking about it and doing some questions in between. But it might take someone lesser time based on where they're at in the knowledge level, right? So that's why it's really important to think about the time frame piece as well.
Love it. And I think this is a good segue to the next principle. So principle number 4.
Yes, it's the appropriate timing principle. So I always like to go back because it's kind of like an advanced organizer and like a quick summary. So I started with the why, I went to the what, then I went to the how, then it makes sense to talk about the when. So this is essential because it really connects to the purpose, it connects to the content, it connects to how you're going to do it. But then you think, when should I be actually introducing a micro-learning experience to folks, right? So instructional designers, subject matter experts looking to integrate micro-learning in their sort of learning journey for their employees or folks, whoever going to be the knowledge consumers, should really carefully think about this idea of when. When should it be revealed to them? When should it be given to them so as to gain maximum benefit from it, right? And the scientific sort of the cognitive science principle behind this is this idea of space learning. And I know lots and lots of organizations are starting to think about that, this notion of space practice, space learning, because we know that it leads to much better sort of long-term retention of concepts and knowledge. And you can also use this to your advantage in terms of you may do a little bit on a Monday and then you do something related to that on Wednesday kind of thing. And it kind of also provides a bit of a scaffolding opportunity for you to design your microlearning experience, because offloading the entirety of the content, like you're already, cognitively overloading your learners, and that's not going to really be beneficial for them. So spacing it also gives you the opportunity to present complex information in small steps, right? So the when is the notion of timing, but not the time frame, meaning how long it should be, right? So it's a really, really crucial thing, because when you catch the learners at the right time, then you'll actually be able to achieve the learning objective in a more efficient, more effective manner as well. So appropriate timing definitely would be the next tip or microlearning principle.
Perfect. And just a follow-up question on this, have you seen any good examples of organizations properly spacing microlearning? One of the challenges we have with most LMS platforms is usually if you have an asynchronous course, even if it's comprised of different microlearning, the learner tends to have the desire just to go through everything line by line. But what are some things that you have seen of good examples or good platforms where it essentially encourages spacing, or it's built into the format?
Absolutely. So I don't want this to come across as like a promotion, but one of my favorite platforms that can really achieve this in a very nice way is 7TAPS, actually, because of the way it is designed. I think one of the deep principles, the foundational principles they went with is the spacing. There's many more in there now, right? So you can create these beautiful learning journeys on a learning path, and then these very effective, depending on how people do it, very effective micro lessons, micro courses can be revealed at certain times. Rather than giving someone everything all at once, you are revealing it when, as I said, the learner is fully primed to go through it, right? So I really, really like the way 7TAPS is organized. There's many other platforms, I'm sure, that folks use and are very effective. Videos work really nicely too, but definitely shying away from putting everything all at once, because it's easier. If you think about it, Eric, it's a lot easier just to put it all together, package it, and give it to the learner. But what we're expecting from this person who needs to now go through all this is having a high amounts of autonomy, responsibility, accountability, and also taking the time to absorb this information. And then what we have kind of like conveyed the message is that here's your package, finish it. And if I am really busy, then I'm probably just like, okay, spend a weekend and then finish it. I will finish it. But have I really grasped that knowledge, that skill acquisition, the goal of that entire sort of hard work of the course development? Did it really happen? So, as I said, it's easier for the instructional designers to do that. The harder part is to actually space it and make that plan ahead of time, right? So I would recommend that we do that. And as I said, for example, 7TAPS does a good job of offering a tool that people can really optimize to get the high level of benefit from space learning, which we know from evidence is extremely, extremely effective. Like the evidence is just so overwhelmingly strong in favor of spacing, especially when you think about also the notion of forgetting curve and all the other aspects that people, those are really popular ideas. That's why I'm sharing them here. But it really can minimize the effects of forgetting and maximize the impact of learning.
Love it. Yeah, I'm definitely a big fan of 7TAPS, and one of my goals is to get them on this podcast just to talk through the platform, because I think a lot more people have to see what are effective systems for microlearning. And then on the concept of spacing, I forgot his first name, but Alan from AlanCom, the founder of AlanCom, he had a really good suggestion on one of his sessions, in Houston the other day, and it was incorporate spacing, but then also tell the learner that the post-assessment is going to be done a few weeks or a month after the course, because it forces the learner to go through the content from a very different perspective, right? If they know that assessment, they're going to have to know the content, that they're really going to have to absorb the information, and it's nothing that they're going to be able to reference immediately after a 30-minute or 1-hour course. They're going to be taking it a lot more seriously.
Yes, and I would say something about this notion, and this takes me into a little bit of a different direction, but I think it's quite useful, especially for the industry. I think we look at two things and we kind of almost use them interchangeably, but that's not the same. So learning and performance, right? So I learned something and I can immediately recreate that or tell you that. So that's my immediate performance, right? But spacing kind of naturally make me forget a little bit, or not forget really, but it's more like information is a little bit harder to access from my long-term memory, right? So when I've spaced it. But when I try to do that, I actually end up learning that so much better, right? So yes, in the first attempt of my spaced learning and demonstrating my performance, I will have a little bit of a diminished performance. But because I did that, I will actually have a much better learning, and the later impact of that would be much more improved performance. So spacing has really, really huge benefits in terms of sort of immediate performance, yes. Learning, yes. So spaced performance may look like, oh, I forgot it, but in fact, you just created a much deeper memory trace. So you will learn so much better. So your delayed performance in the long run will actually increase. But most learners, most designers tend to think that, because nobody likes to, not do well, right? So when I ask people to space, it's kind of like, it's a bit of a pain. That's what desirable difficulty is, right? It's a bit of a pain, but go through that pain. It's important to go through that pain. And yes, if you remind people that their assessment will be a little bit spaced, I think that's, and that they will struggle a little. And I think reminding them that struggle is a good thing, not in that sense of like struggle, continue to struggle, but like struggle to access those memories that have been placed in your head at some point is a good thing, because it's going to lead to long-term performance. I think that communication is really, really essential, because we tend to give up sooner than later. That's just how we work.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I'm sure you've come across this content, but that key principle was mentioned in Make It Stick, the process of forgetting information and going through recall, how it's a lot better for retention. So I think the author is Kirkpatrick. Oh, perfect. There we go.
It's like on my desk. I always keep it right here. Yes.
I'm not that cool. I wish I could puol mine up too, but I don't have.
Oh, that's fine.
I think I have the audiobook. Awesome. All right, so let's jump into principle number 5.
All right. The next one I have, it is, and I know we said 5, but I may actually jump to a 6th one later on, because that would be really beneficial for folks. And that's where the platform would really come in as well. But 5th one would be contextually appropriate format. And what that means is that considering how the microlearning should be packaged and delivered, right? Now, I know there's platforms like Articulate, or people might be using those larger sort of learning management systems. There's so many in the industry. In academia, we have a certain number as well. There's things like 7Tabs. So they don't all align with what your purpose is going to be, what your content is, and if you go back to the structure and the timing of it, right? So you would have to think about the format first, and then picking how you're going to actually package it, right? So learning designers will be making multimedia related decisions at this point. This is really that fun part where you will ask questions like, hey, do I make a video to convey this message, or an infographic will do the trick and maybe I can add some hotspots in the infographic to add some interactivity, or a simple text-based micro lesson, good old explanation will just do the trick, right? And what the theories that I want to mention here that can guide us at this point in our thinking process as we're designing microlearning, things like going back to the absolute basics, understand what dual coding theory is all about, understand that when we actually use both the channels in our sort of memory system, the channels that manages the visuals and the channel that manages text, right? Using both of them, we know that we're decreasing the cognitive load in our working memory, but using that appropriately. So understanding the basics of cognitive load theory would be key, which has given rise to actually what we now know as cognitive theory of multimedia learning. So all those multimedia design principles, I think there's 15 or 16 of those that Richard Mayer has given us: coherence principle, contiguity principle, redundancy principle. These are all really important. They give you actual ideas. How do I label my things? How do I present my knowledge? Is it a visual, or is it visual and text both? And the idea is you don't want to overload your learner's memory, working memory, in the moment of a sort of knowledge acquisition. That's it's going through in front of their eyes, whichever format you're using. Learning designers also need to consider what platform will I be using, as I mentioned earlier, to eventually host it. And it's not that you choose a platform first. No, you actually understand what you need to do and then you choose the platform, which I think in the industry is probably what might be happening. It's like, okay, we're going to use this, and how do we maximize that? That's not always a bad thing, but you are restricting yourself then to one specific things. And those are probably different kind of financial, contractual decisions made at a different level. But for an instructional designer, I think it's important to understand that platform comes one step after. Before, you got to know what you're doing, how you're doing, when you're doing, why you're doing, right? So how can my learners access this platform? The chosen platform should be easily accessible. So I'm a huge fan, and this is why I also mentioned 7 tabs. I'm a huge fan of decreasing any number of extra steps to reach my learning. Because if you give me create an account, click on here, verify the account, click on here, ooh, my working memory is so overloaded. I've already those are logistical obstacles. So you want to eliminate those. So those are really important decisions, because you want to just maximize that packaging, that it just goes through the learner and boom, they're ready to learn. So the goal should be minimize any possible logistical obstacles and just get on with that sort of packaging part of it. So the format is, I would say, the 5th important microlearning principle.
Love the approach, and definitely gonna try to find an affiliate link to 7 tabs, just because it's definitely a good commercial. Again, I'm a big fan of the platform, and we'll get them on here. So I'm incredibly biased, right? We're an interactive video company. We love video. We tend to lean into that. And how do you factor in learner preferences? So we typically ask our clients to survey or gather feedback. But to be honest with you, and I'll be the first to say it, video is not always the best option. It's not always necessary. And with that being said, we tend to factor in learner preferences a bit more. So how do you incorporate learner preferences into this process?
So to answer that, I'd say I think videos are great because they are just always there and people can match their pace. You may watch it a little bit faster pace, you can pause, you can go back. I think there is a lot of value in videos. But as you also said, and they are kind of really aligned with the dual coding theory also, right? Because you got the visual, you got the text occasionally, and then you got the narration. You really are conveying the message to someone while you can't be with them. And it's permanent for the most part, right? Unless it's deleted. So I think videos are really amazing, but not always a video is necessary. So you mentioned the notion of learner preferences. I always think that, and this is something that was important to me when I was doing my doctoral research, I didn't want to just give my participants just videos, because then I was limiting myself to even understand what kind of micro lessons they were actually getting more appealed to or inclined to. So I did a variety of, I tried things that I worked in H5P, which had text and accordion style micro lesson. You click and you go to something, of cards that move around. I did videos. I did all of those other things. Now, what I found with hundreds of participants that have participated in my research study is that it wasn't just, they never said that I liked it because it's the video. They said things like, I liked it because it worked for what I was trying to do. So I would say learner preferences are important, but content is so much more important to understand how you're going to present the information. Does that make sense? And you still can integrate multiple things. So my answer, learner preferences are multimodal. So use multimodalities, use all of it sometimes, and put in a little bit of that, put in a little of that, based on if you really need it. So learner preferences will be met through that process. And I also think that explicitly mentioning that it could be a part of the learning design right at the upfront. We've decided to create it in this format because we think it will have most impact, right? Like, you don't necessarily need to watch a 5-minute video when a quick infographic can actually, reach the goal. So, and again, even an infographic is multimodal, so the learner preferences are met because there's a visual component in there, there's the textual component in there, and I'm not talking about the, word that shouldn't be said, learning styles. Learning styles is a debunked theory, we know that. What I'm talking about is using multimodality to maximize learning. So learner preferences will automatically be met. I think we just need to communicate that to them.
Got it. I know it's funny how learning styles is such a taboo now in the industry, right? Anytime anybody posts on it. I know, I agree. I mean, the evidence is there, right? It doesn't exist, but I kind of like it when non-practitioners use that term. I mean, it's just the language they use, right? Anytime we can align to their preferences, it gives us a chance to explain things in a better format. So I know, I try not to attack people too much, right? Just because it's their way of explaining it. It's a good approach, but and I always think that there has to be the balance of, giving people what they want versus making sure that the content is. The business goals and the content is effective, because it is a balance, right? You need people to be engaged and excited about the content before following more of like a theory of what's the best structure.
Yeah, I just want to say I absolutely agree with you, Eric, that we should not be attacking people because they use the word learning styles. I have used it before I knew this, right? So I'm just in that privileged position. So what I think is we need to understand the reason someone used learning style in their post or in their approach or in their discussion and presentation is because they don't know it. So to mock is the worst thing we could do. We just say, oh, with all due respect, I just want to say that all the evidence is missing in favor. And yeah, there might be preferences and here's some content. I absolutely agree with you 100%. They only are using it because they don't know it. So our responsibility becomes that we bring them into that realm of knowledge, that privileged knowledge that you and I have access to, that, hey, let's talk about this, right? It's like, maybe we're talking about, and maybe it's a genuine understanding of like preferences, as you were saying. People do have preferences. I like to watch videos also because they're everywhere now, right? Like through reels and everything. But I absolutely agree. And I 100% wanted to mention that with you on that. So thank you for mentioning that. And I want the viewers and listeners to also know that it's absolutely okay to make the mistake, and it's absolutely not okay for those who know it to say it in a negative way, because they're not like trying to claim it. They're just saying, oh, it would be nice. It's like, oh, actually, we can have a very nice, easy conversation about it, and people are willing to learn. It's like having a conversation with a kid who believes in Santa Claus, and when they get older, it's like, actually, I've been starting to tell my old kids as they're getting older, it's like, actually, all that money that you got under your pillow, actually you lost the tooth, that was just my luck, right? We just need to have a gentle conversation about it. That's all we need. Just have respect for each other.
Love it. All right, now principle number 6.
Yes, and as I said, I know you said 5, but how can we not talk about something so important called interactivity? And this is my 6th microlearning principle, or amazing ideal tip, and I call it the choice of appropriate interactivity. Now I want to caution that the word interaction sounds like we're talking about maybe social interaction or collaboration, but when I talk about interactivity, I'm talking about how is the learner going to interact with the content. Because the idea is that when they can interact with the content better, meaning they grasp the content better, then you're automatically setting them up for success to be able to interact with the other learners, and also with their peers, and also with the instructor or the subject matter expert. So, but the first step is content and learner interactivity. And this is where I think the power of things like retrieval practice really comes in place, right? So if developing the micro lesson can be analogous to creating a dish following a recipe, interactivity would be the spices, if I may say, that can enhance the flavors of the finished product, i.e. enhance the learning. So learning designers can spice up a micro-learning experience by providing learners with opportunities to test their understanding of the content. Considering adding retrieval practice opportunities to the micro lessons with things like zero stakes quizzes or low stakes quizzes. These can also be in the form of multiple choice or whatever you want to do. Now, this is the other fun part. Now you can come back to the micro learning principle, right? You can come back to the space learning principle is what I meant to say. So you are doing retrieval practice either immediately, or you're saying, okay, today, Monday, you're gonna get the micro lesson on platform ABC. And then 2 days later, they get the little a bit of an assessment, and keep it low stakes, keep it nice and easy. So that interactivity, what you're really doing is that you're giving them yet another reason to think about the content that was sort of exposed to them, or they were exposed to, right? And I like to also say, as Daniel Willingham says, memory is the residue of thought, which basically means that people remember what they think about. So your interactivity is that reason that you're giving them to think about something. If it's a story, if it's an analogy, if it's a question, you're giving them a reason to think about, or through a quiz as well, right? Through a quick assessment, you're making them think about it. They're going to remember it better. So yeah, memory is the residue of thought. Daniel Willingham. Very powerful quote. I want it on a t-shirt.
Love it. We'll get those made and put a link in the YouTube description. Definitely love the idea of interactivity, and I have seen some cool examples of this. One of the patient education apps we've supported in the past, it wasn't just a library of content, but it would prompt and text learners, or patients in this case, to go through the content and ask them questions. And what was great about it, they didn't have to log into a platform, they didn't have to sign into anything. They just got a prompt that said, hey, your doctor wanted to make sure you knew this, check this link out. They'd watch the video, or they'd get a text, hey, please complete the survey and make sure you understand what's going on with your kidney health, etc.
That's so fantastic. And lots of research, Eric, and you talk about patient literacy, another really, really dear topic. I work with an organization in the US and Mitonomy, and we develop patient literacy content. And it's not just videos, there's some written content as well. And really, it's the research is very clear that a patient who's already, their working memory is just completely overloaded, getting all these instructions in the hospital, in the doctor's clinic, they can't actually pay attention. It's not their fault. Like, patients, we've all been there. A ton of information while my working memory is, oh, I'm not well, or this or that. Like, what am I going to do? And so the level of forgetting is exponentially higher within the patient sort of world, if you think about it, right? And something so simple like that, a little question popping in their text and they could answer it. It's zero stakes. It's not going to give them a transcript grade or anything like that. But what it gives them is like, oh, I should check my blood sugar level right now, or I should eat a certain way, or you know what, it's time for my walk because I just got remembered to through this question, what did I do? So such powerful interactivity with the content, and especially in the patient literacy world, I think there's a lot of benefit to be had for so many people.
Oh, you're gonna love this platform. We'll definitely chat offline about this, but very similar to Mitonomy, because I'm a big fan of what they're doing. But what's cool about this one is it's integrated with AI, and so it takes their EHR information, prescribes learning plans, and it automatically sends messages and prompts to them. So it's not necessarily relying on them to like be proactive, to log onto the platform, to look for content. It's trying to guide them, and the new features in integrating AI and new LLMs are going to make it so much better. So I'm excited about where this is going.
Amazing. Yes, patient education is a huge field, and I think especially microlearning can be a perfect sort of fit in that, because you're not looking at university level courses there. You're really looking at these nuggets of high impact as much as possible. So yeah, I totally agree.
Awesome. All right, so we're near the end, and typically we wrap up with a few questions. The first one is going to be, who do you look up to in the industry? And then the second one is, what are some trends that you see happening in the context of microlearning or online learning in general?
Awesome. Okay, so I'll answer with the person I look up in the industry, and I'd say you say one person, but or who do you look up? There are far too many, so to pick one is a bit tricky and not necessary and not so easy for me. And I would say it's not even these names are from the industry directly. I mean, I'm an academic first as well, and I do work in the industry too. So I would say for me, these are folks from the space of educational research. Huge fan of Paul Kirshner and Carl Hendrick, and they've come up with this book called How Learning Happens in 2020. And I think what this book did is that it really brought back crucial discussions about what we absolutely need to know about learning and what that means for practice. And I think it's almost as important of a book in like our 2020s sort of era as Make It Stick was, because it just brought these discussions so in front of us. Also super fascinated by the work and thinking done by Robert Bjork and Elizabeth Bjork, especially their work on desirable difficulties. I know I did mention a little bit about that today as well. A lot of my understanding of how we can design effective instruction that is recallable, durable, and transferable. Learning that is recallable, durable, and transferable comes from this notion. And this has huge implications of how we design and implement training. I actually just recently wrote an article for the ATD magazine. It was called No Pain, No Gain. And also really big fan of Pooja Agarwal. She's done some tremendous research on virtual practice and really changed the course of how we look at practice testing, and now really calling it virtual practice and benefiting so much from that work. And last but not the least, I'd like to mention Barbara Oakley. She truly is a powerhouse and really giving when it comes to sharing knowledge. And sorry, it wasn't a short answer, but those are really, really amazing names. You also asked what's the one trend or what's microlearning trend that I'm really excited about. Lately, through my discussions, through my LinkedIn exposure, all the meetings like with yourself right now that I'm having, I'm seeing that more people in the learning and development industry are looking for evidence, especially folks in leadership positions. And they're not just fascinated by a trend, but really looking for what really works and why, and what doesn't work, because we don't need to keep doing what doesn't work. And I want to say trends are just trends. They come and go, but evidence is everlasting, and it can guide us to do our jobs efficiently and effectively.
Awesome. Nidhi, thank you so much for the time on the call. Where is a good place for people to find you or find more information about you?
Yeah, so one place I would say is definitely LinkedIn. I am relatively active there. I'd like to share. I truly see LinkedIn as a place of giving before I receive. So I share a lot, which is why, you'll see, how you connected with me as well. So LinkedIn, if you just look up my name, or probably there'll be the link that you might share of my LinkedIn space. So folks can do that. The other thing is I write a Substack newsletter called Science of Learning. It's just Substack, scienceoflearning.substack.com. And if you just looked up Science of Learning and my name, you probably will find it. And I write a lot of educational research, and I write in the form of snippets with a colleague of mine. And we bring that educational research closer to practitioners like, teachers, but also instructional designers and learning designers. So that's another place for folks to look for me and look for my work and, continue to learn about this thing as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you, Eric. Really a pleasure.
Want to learn more about microlearning best practices? We've got you covered. Check out the video cards for more related content. Don't forget to subscribe for weekly tips and explore the description for a curated list of resources to continue your e-learning journey.